And so that's why I say is like you could have a proverbial boy raised by wolves who was never given a thought to these things. And to the atheist, they would say that the boy raised by wolves is an atheist, since he lacks a belief in God. But if you somehow he has all the necessary acculturation that you could ask him questions or talk with him, and you say, the universe has a creator, designer that is beyond the universe itself. His first inclination is probably not going to be, oh, that's craziness, that's insanity. His first inclination is probably going to be, well, that kind of makes sense. Tell me more, And so why I think that the lack of belief definition of atheism fails, well, one of the many reasons, is that atheists have this kind of reflexive, automatic dismissiveness of the idea. And that dismissiveness is certainly not the default.
I'm super excited to have my next guest on the Unapologetic Apologists. You can go subscribe to his YouTube channel. There will be a link in the description. Deflating Atheism, Mr. Deflating, or Mr. Atheism, whichever you prefer. Thank you for being here.
Not Mr. Atheism. Yeah. Hey, it's good to be here.
Yeah, or I looking at you, I do think you kind of look like Jonathan Lithgow, but with really beautiful hair. So maybe even Mr. Lithgow would be appropriate. Maybe just to get started, and before we introduce the crasher of today's episode, maybe just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, how you became a Christian, and what led you to kind of being interested in apologetics and starting a YouTube channel.
Well, that's it was not until a few years ago that I even call myself a Christian, and that was of a gradual process, but I was never an atheist. I was for quite a while I was kind of a generic theist, but I was kind of irked by online atheists even before I was a Christian, and so I don't even think I knew the word apologetics at that time, or at least knew of the field of Christian apologetics. But I thought a lot of the atheist material on the internet at that time was so self-evidently poor that it just kind of demanded a response. And so I got into the habit of responding in comments and Facebook comments and all these things until finally I just decided, well, it'd be better to make some sort of a permanent record so I don't have to keep going back to these same points. So I kind of started the YouTube channel.
Very cool. So, well, if you were just kind of a generic theist, at that point, what would you say your position on Jesus was?
Well, can you be more specific?
Well, yeah, I mean, if somebody had come to you and said, well, what do you think about Jesus? Do you think he really rose from the dead as a matter of history?
I know. Again, it's hard for me to say what exactly I did and did not affirm at a certain time in my life where I probably wasn't giving these questions a whole lot of thought. But no, I probably would have told you at the time that he was a historical figure. It's just I was unsure about the claim that he was raised from the dead.
Okay, so what would you say would have maybe pushed you to the point where you were kind of accepting of that history of his resurrection?
Well, I think what would have pushed me to the point is what did is it's various arguments from online apologists, from Christian apologists and stuff. But as I said, it was always, I think my experience mirrors that of a lot of people, is that the complete vacuity of online atheism actually pushed me towards Christianity, because like everything they said was so kind of self-evidently facile and just lacking that I thought, well, there has to be some merit in what they're against, because all their arguments for what they're for are just so poor.
Yeah, so I see someone who pretends that it was the evidence who persuaded him and not some kind of bias of a hope of the hereafter because he can't handle the reality of the truth of atheism, as it were.
Yeah, well, I have a whole rant about that, but yeah.
Well, please, I'd be very interested in your rant there.
Well, they all don their little psychologist beanie, and they all don their little sociologist beanie, and they say, well, you fear death, or that's the only reason, or religion was mankind's attempt to explain, the things he could not explain. I'm like, citation, please? Could you please you claim that you have an evidence-based worldview, yet you throw out these sweeping assertions about psychology and sociology that apparently don't require any evidence whatsoever. So yeah, I thought that was a complete hypocrisy. That's actually if you read C.S. Lewis, you'll know of the fallacy called bulverism, where you ascribe motives to a person's beliefs. I think he's so disgusted by it.
Yeah.
You have something to say?
Well, no.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was gonna say.
Oh yeah, but where you ascribe motives to a person's belief in order to discredit. So it's kind of like an ad hominem, but it's always the reason, the true reason for your beliefs are not your stated reasons, and that is bad in how atheists try to dismiss Christian beliefs. You also see it a lot in politics. It also happens a lot in politics these days. And if I were to be honest, I'd say politics is occupying a lot of my time.
Mm. Yeah, well, I say,
and you could do it from a Christian basis too. You could do. I see a whole bunch of Christians say, "Oh well, atheists are only atheists because they want to live without sin and not have to face any judgment." And I think that's wrong too.
Right.
I'll speak against that too. So I'm not hypocritical about that.
Yeah, but it does show that the criticism could go both ways, right? It's not only against the Christians if you're going to just ascribe motive. And I do think it could also be a form of the genetic fallacy. I've seen atheists kind of back off and say, well, it's not the genetic fallacy because I'm not saying that the belief is therefore false. It's like, yeah, but you are kind of trying to invalidate maybe the reasonableness of someone using evidence to come to the worldview. So it's
exactly. And I will say there always comes a point where sometimes it's really difficult to take a person's stated motivations as being genuine. At that point, I mean, there's nothing wrong with voicing those concerns that maybe a person has some other things. Like, I'd be glad to speak at length about that, which you probably wouldn't want. But the thing is, you can say that. The thing is, that can't be a basis for dismissing the belief itself. Otherwise, it's very much similar to an ad hominem or a genetic fallacy or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, the reasons that atheist arguments suck is that atheist arguments suck. It's not because they have this juvenile desire to try to crush other people's most dearly held beliefs or anything.
Right. So I guess before we continue, because I do have some questions about a debate you recently had, I should introduce Mr. John Dunphy, because he's here to kind of help me co-interview. Hello, Mr. John. How are you, sir?
I'm doing all right. All I heard was in response to an intelligent argument like, "Oh, you're just afraid of death, so you can't deal. You're mentally unstable." All I heard was genetic fallacy, ad hominem. It's just word salads. I mean,
yeah. Well, what to expect from a Steelers fan?
Yeah, we're all atheists apparently. So ever since we lost the Green Bay Packers, just all of Pittsburgh has become atheistic. You just mentioned it though. Well, yeah. I would say something, but it's your podcast, so.
Well, I am trying to navigate through some of these slides, so I apologize if any of the audio is lost out on here. But so
I do have a question for Rob.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Dunphy.
Who's the most annoying atheist you've done a response to?
Oh well, I've been out of the game for so long, as you guys might know. I've had some family difficulties, so I haven't been dipping my toes into atheist land too recently. But like my response is different from like Max's. But as far as just like atheists, it doesn't even necessarily have to deal with the content of what they say. Sometimes just their way of expressing themselves is just incredibly grating. And I would put Bionic Dance at number 1 and probably Cult of Dusty at number 2. Literally, I cannot get through like 5 seconds of their videos. It's just like fingernails on the blackboard to me.
Well, for me, it's entertainment because it's just like, man, this is the guy who almost had me become an atheist when I was younger, like 2014.
I'm so sorry.
Well, then it shows you, no, the lack of apologetics in the church is horrible, and it's just like, no wonder people are becoming atheists. Because,
Yeah.
People like Cult of Dusty take advantage of the internet while Christians don't, and have a pretty good influence.
That's another thing, and that's another thing where I'm going to say things about motives, because I think we all know that, you know, kids who are 14 or whatever years old, they have certain needs that they need to feel like they belong. You know, they need to have some sense of purpose. I think when they come across these internet atheists, I think it kind of feeds these kind of desires they have, but it feeds them in a very cheap way. It's like, I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat like donuts or crullers and stuff. It's like, no, that's not like nutritious food. You need something better than donuts and crullers if you're hungry. But I think a lot of times adolescents are very insecure, and so they, you know, the atheists kind of sell them this very kind of cheaply bought sense of superiority, where if you just kind of parrot these slogans, you can, you know, feel that you're superior to your, you know, classmates and teachers and parents and whatever.
You know, I saw a great clip from this one dude. I think he's the dude who started the Harlem Shake, but like, he does this one character, and he was responding to some atheist comment on his channel, and he described them perfectly. He was like, yeah, some 16-year-old sitting back in the classroom on Reddit thinking he's better than everyone. And he went through his subscriptions and was Richard Dawkins' Foundation for Science and Reason. And I was just laughing because his description of the average atheist and how Reddit is their #1 source.
Yes.
Yeah,
or at least it was back in the day, back like 2010, 2012, around that era especially, yeah.
Yeah. I also like the way Steven Crowder described it, which is like, they think they somehow got something that the rest of us missed because they watched half of a Christopher Hitchens debate. It's like, yeah, and listen, I'll admit, when I first got into it, I fast-forwarded through everything except William Lane Craig, but I'm more mature now. I try to watch primarily the atheists, so I'm not perfect, but I'm doing better.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you're definitely far from perfect, but you know.
Well, here's a question for you, Rob, because, you know, John was just asking who you think the most intelligent atheist you've debated is. Have you come across this new guy? He destroyed Trent Doherty on John's channel, this atheist, and he destroyed Greg Kokel and Gary Habermas. And the episode hasn't aired yet. I heard he just destroyed Braxton Hunter. His name is Maxwell Yates. Have you heard of this guy?
He destroyed Gary Habermas?
Yeah, they debated him.
Yeah.
He debated him on the reservation.
And he also had a friend help him destroy Inspiring Philosophy as well. I mean, they're a new debate team, and they're like the new atheists, you could say.
I'll introduce you.
They're very
to him.
original.
I'll have you. Maybe I'll introduce you to him. We can have you come on the channel and debate him if you'd be happy doing something like that. But yeah, so. Oh, what was the guy's name? It was something Richards. I should have written down his name. You would think if I was a professional interviewer, I would have written down the guy's name before I start asking you questions on the debate you just had on Modern Day Debate. Well, I knew it in my head, and now it's complete anathema. But the debate was, is atheism the default position or the default belief? Which...
No, that was my debate.
Yeah. Oh, did it seem as though I was asking John? I certainly wasn't asking John. John doesn't debate anyone because he's afraid.
Yeah, I debated an open theist. They got their stuff much better than atheists, so...
Perhaps this is a good point. Yes, but his last name was Richards, and he was the founder of Canadian Atheists, which I thought was really interesting. Probably why he was so nice, because, you know, he's a Canadian. But so, yeah, I guess right off the bat, you had kind of prepared an opening statement for what you thought would be the position he was defending, but then he was kind of defending a different position. So maybe you could kind of introduce us to kind of what happened there.
Yeah, well, because the gracious host asked me, he was kind of fishing around for debate topics, and so like my main thing, the topic was suggested by me. Because I already had some material prepared. I already had some stuff written down. So I said, well, I could use the stuff I wrote down and use it as, kind of part of the opening statement, and we could debate that thing. Otherwise, I was kind of apprehensive about writing anything. By the way, I'm not an experienced debater or anything, so I don't have a whole lot of experience. So it can be kind of intimidating when you're put into the kind of forum of a formal debate. But so I took this material I already had, and I made an opening statement, and like every position I responded to in my opening statement, he demurred, and he didn't really seem to have any position whatsoever. His atheism was a complete negation. It's, as you know, someone who defines their own atheism purely as a mental state or a lack of belief. I mean, like I said, by that definition, a tree stump would be an atheist. So I found it enormously difficult, and so I tried.
Or a bag of wet hair.
Yeah, a bag of wet hair or anything. Yes, and so I kept to nail him down, and to my surprise, he was actually very consistent on the lack of belief. I said, "Well, are you going to say that God's existence is more improbable than it is probable?" He would not commit to that. I said, "Would you commit to the premise that theism is necessarily irrational?" He would not commit to that. And so I asked him, "Well, what is Canadian atheists about then?" He said, "Well, we're for accepting atheists into society, and we're against anti-blasphemy laws." I was like, "Well, I'm against anti-blasphemy laws too. So what is our point of disagreement here?" And if you say, "Well, I lack a belief in God," I said, "I agree, you do lack a belief in God. There's absolutely zero disagreement." So I found it. I would say I found it frustrating, but he was such a decent dude that or at least he seemed nice. Who knows?
Well, I have a reductio ad absurdum. As Joe Rogan would say, it's a home run. There are 3,000 gods. Oh wait, there are 999 gods, Richard Dawkins says, even though it's 3,000 in other versions of the argument. There are 3,000 gods you could believe in. What makes yours different? You lack a belief in their gods, which for some reason makes you an atheist. But I guess the Canadian atheists welcome you in. But
he did even try stuff like that.
Yeah.
He should have.
Two of the kind of initial points he had made that I found interesting where kind of you have to be taught about God. And so he seemed to be like rewinding all the way as a baby. Like you're born, you're kind of a blank slate, setting aside some of your biological inclinations, right? You're kind of blank slate and you have to be taught about God. And then he was kind of pointing to the diversity of beliefs about what God is like if you look at different cultures and different beliefs. And for me, and you got into this when you mentioned a book that you had pulled up on Amazon, but for me, it's yeah, for me, regardless of the diversity of what God looks like in other cultures, to me, I think there's a question that has to be asked, which is, does there seem to be this something in humanity that just recognizes a deity and has attributes anything, that has these religious experiences, regardless if we're attributing them to different deities? Why is there something in humans that just has religious experiences? Why do we have that inclination?
I agree with you, and one thing where he was just dead wrong is that he seemed to think that the fact that obviously people end up in religions that are not Christianity, and so that somehow invalidates it. I guess maybe it's kind of implicitly going to the kind of 3,000 gods canard, but yeah, it's not like I'm not the argument. First off, I think it's important to say, if I didn't make this clear in the debate, I don't think it's really material to the debate of whether atheism is the default position. That's a philosophical debate. That's an epistemic debate. That's not something where you get into areas like psychology or sociology or things like that. I didn't really think it was relevant. But a lot of people, even in the comments, if you read through the comments, they seem to think that if anybody says that atheism is the default or is not the default or whatever, that this is somehow a naturally occurring, something that we, biologically have or whatever. That I didn't think that was relevant to the debate at all. And as it turns out, nothing was relevant to debate since there was no debate. But yes.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was thinking through, maybe you could tell me what you think of this, because, first of all, if you define atheism correctly, as you did off the bat, which is a positive claim, right, about the absence of deities in reality, well, then no, of course, that's not the default, and he might have even agreed to that. But then even if you define atheism as an absence of belief, and so you say, oh, well, of course, by default, you're born with an absence of beliefs. You have to be taught any positive beliefs. Even there, I'm not quite sure that atheism would be the default, because you could still say as someone gets older and matures, even if they're not taught about God, they could still have some kind of natural inclination to believe in a higher power. I know people who have said that that was the case for them. They weren't necessarily raised in church or taught about God, but they always kind of looked at reality and just said, yeah, there has to be some kind of higher power. They felt kind of an internal inclination to discover that and see what or who it was.
And that was exactly the point I made. That was exactly the point I made, because I said the idea that the universe has a creator and a designer is a very appealing one, is I think self-evident to a lot of people. Now you could take issue with that, say, well, there's more to it than simply, the world looks designed, therefore it's designed. And I'll agree with you, but it is a very natural conclusion to come to. And so that's why I say is that you could have a proverbial boy raised by wolves who was never given a thought to these things. And to the atheist, they would say that the boy raised by wolves is an atheist, since he lacks a belief in God. But if you somehow he has all the necessary acculturation that you could ask him questions or talk with him, and you say, yeah, the universe has a creator, designer that is beyond the universe itself. His first inclination is probably not going to be, oh, that's craziness, that's insanity. His first inclination is probably going to be, well, that kind of makes sense. Tell me more, And so why I think that the lack of belief definition of atheism fails, well, one of the many reasons, is that atheists have this kind of reflexive, automatic dismissiveness of the idea. And that dismissiveness is certainly not the default.
Yeah.
Well, see, an answer to your, well, the universe seems designed, and, well, why do people believe in a deity? And it's quite simple. Man created God in his image.
Do you have anything that's not just a cliche?
Yeah.
Are you telling me I'm unoriginal?
I had a legitimate point I was going to make, and now I can't remember it, thanks to John.
Hey, don't blame me. I don't control your memory.
Talk about a boy raised by wolves, but yeah.
No, I only saw like the first half hour of that debate, and when atheists say the default position is atheism, because when you're born you're an atheist, it's like, no, you're an agnostic. You're literally of a state of no knowledge. In fact, you're not even agnostic, because an agnostic is at least a person who affirms the position that there is not enough evidence to make a conclusion either way, basically withhold judgment. So you're not an epistemologer yet, so there is no real dismissiveness or
That's kind of also a frustration, which I probably should have mentioned, is that to call atheism a lack of belief is a waste of a word, because we already have a word for agnostic. If you're going to say that an atheist is an agnostic, I mean, we already have a word. Why not just use the word that we already have? They
want to separate into strong and weak atheism. You know what it is? They want the claim of atheism, right? But without
the burden of actually having to defend.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really it, because
they want the edginess of atheism without the intellectual burden of having a burden of proof.
Yeah, I mean, something more appropriate would be like atheism and then like strong and weak agnosticism, right? Because even some of the atheists today will kind of say, well, it's more or less the positive claim that there are no good reasons to believe in God, which you could say is a stronger claim than just kind of agnosticism in the sense that's kind of apathetic towards it. It's like, well, I don't know if there's a God or not. But even when the term agnosticism was invented, it was invented to mean that you can't know, that there isn't sufficient evidence, that you can't know. So even if that's the positive claim they're making, that's still agnosticism, not atheism.
Yeah, well, the can't know definition, it still admits of several varieties. I was always confused by that. And by the way, no one seems to like that definition. No Christian or atheist ever seems to like the Thomas Huxley definition of agnosticism, because nobody uses it. I think because of its ambiguity. Now, does that mean that in the current year, which of course is not Thomas Huxley's current year, but just in the sum of human knowledge, it is not capable, possible to make that determination with what we know, or is it is impossible in principle to know, or is it an individual? Maybe the knowledge is out there in the world, but an individual, it is not possible for that individual to know. So there are three ways you can go with it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, Tom Jump's claim, Tom Jump says that, and he says that this is what atheism means, is that you can't know, that there isn't sufficient evidence to know. And one way he does that is essentially by saying, well,
no. I mean, you're going to, just before you proceed, do you mean it is not possible in principle with all the knowledge that we could ever have in human history? It is still not possible to know.
Well, do you know his argument from naturalistic pantheism? Have you?
What he says is that epistemically, we don't have the epistemic capability to know that kind of a metaphysical claim. It's just out of the reach of humanity.
Because he argues that there can be other possible metaphysical claims that equally explain the evidence, and somehow makes the leap that therefore they're both equally explainable, and you can't really make one way or the other. So hence, it's more rational to be an atheist, even though that would be agnostic.
Okay. So he believes it is not possible in principle ever to have knowledge that could tip it one way or the other.
Yeah, because he always uses naturalistic pantheism. Naturalistic pantheism can be used as an alternative and equally explain all the evidence and have the same probability, which is his claim, but it's not quite defended.
Wait, is it pantheism or panentheism?
He always uses naturalistic pantheism.
Okay.
Which he defines as an eternal, all-powerful nature. So it's basically all the attributes of God, just subtract consciousness. He says it could equally explain all the evidence just as well, but without the arbitrary addition of personhood into the hypothesis.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of the word there, yeah.
Yeah. So I did write down a couple of things.
It was with all first cause arguments. So there's the added attribute of being purposive, of having purpose, and so I guess he has something that could check all those metaphysical boxes minus the kind of purposive, intentional nature of the first cause.
But even when he does it, like, he'll invoke certain things, like when somebody says, well, a consciousness has to choose X for X to happen, right? Because it's like a new event. Well, he said, well, maybe there's just something built into nature that can choose. And I'm like, but you're using like personhood language to say it could just be built into nature.
See, yeah, and now you're just adding, you're having your part of a cake, you could say, because at this point your proposition you don't really have defined too well. So how can you even use that as an equal explanation if you're just going to appeal to what we don't know, which is God of the gaps, well, in his case, naturalistic pantheism of the gaps.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that even Christian apologists, I mean, would say that, when we describe God's attributes, his lovingness, whatever, etc., all that is by analogy. It's analogical. That we don't actually think that God is a human mind. But it could be analogized as a human mind.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, then you get to the incarnation of God, a super consciousness mind, and so on. Transcendent mind somehow takes on the form of almost a human mind, almost, if he's fully human, fully God. Unless you adopt the one heresy, which is, well, God sort of is just a soul taking on a body almost, but that's not what the doctrine of the incarnation is.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I mean, God the Father. It's always by analogy, not God as man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just remember, I wish I could recall who it was that was debating. Oh, it was when William Lane Craig was talking to Roger Penrose on Unbelievable. And Roger Penrose was basically saying, well, God just seems too much like us. And William Lane Craig said, well, maybe we're like him. And I thought that, yeah, That's a great point. It's because we're created. It's not like it seems so made up. You could say, oh yeah, we just made up a god to mirror father and son, like we humans have father and son. It's like, well, no, I think it's actually just the reverse. We were created to kind of mirror the internal triune God, and so our relationships are different in that aspect, but they mirror that, and so that's why there's language that, like you said, is analogous.
Yes, exactly.
That, or we created God in our image.
Stop! I'm trying to make legitimate points here.
And that's not a legitimate point. Okay. Okay, I see how it is. Confirmation bias.
No.
Wait, what's your thing, DA, where random atheists just will yell out a random fallacy even though it's not relevant?
Yeah, just name the fallacy. I feel like there's a devil's advocate. Then there's like the third string. Yeah, you have the all the good devil's advocates were out here.
Special pleading fallacy.
Yeah. So one last point, and we'll move on to some other points, but we'll do that for Web Extended because those are more political topics. But one other point, and this came up in the Q&A, was morality. Someone kind of asked Richards, I hope I'm saying his last name right, I believe it was Richards, where his morality comes from. And he kind of gave this very subjective answer. He said, well, it comes from me. And they kind of gave some analogies. Oh, I try to do it, with kind of these theories of, how lawmakers try to, give equality to everyone. And he said, I hope I try to get it right. And I'm hoping I always get it right. And maybe conversations like this can help me change my mind because I am always trying to get it right, but ultimately it comes from me. And you, Deflating, made a really good point that that's a contradiction. Because if you're saying it's ultimately subjective, but I try to get it right, well, right according to what standard?
Exactly. Yeah, and he did it within the space of a sentence. But I mean, that's what I find is a lot of times when atheists are pressed with this, and by the way, I'll just say that like arguments for morality are never like my first line of defense. That's not really my particular bag of tricks, is like arguments for morality. But when atheists kind of try to defend it, I find they go for very kind of saccharine, very kind of sentimental, it's nice to be nice kind of arguments that don't really bear up to scrutiny, And so yeah, I mean I think it was just an underthought position. And he went off on a rant about morality and his kind of egalitarian view of morality, and I thought it was really kind of an irrelevant discussion that he went into, but out of courtesy I didn't interrupt him or anything. But yeah, again, he's obviously coming from an egalitarian perspective, and he just kind of assumes that to be the case. I don't really necessarily have any problems with that. I just don't think he has a basis for it, really. I think if he wants it, he looked for what's the guy's name? Richard Rawls, I think is the name of the philosopher.
Wait, is it Richard Randolph, the one dude?
Yeah. Well, the president of Canadian Atheists. I forget. Rawls is the name of the philosopher who's kind of a neo utilitarian. No, not a neo-pragmatist, I should say. Utilitarian's kind of a dirty word. But yeah, so and he obviously has a very kind of liberal, kind of egalitarian perspective. But I think better than any sort of thought experiment where all our every advantage that we have in society is shielded from everyone else. I think basically the best justification for that egalitarian philosophy is probably found in the Gospels, where Jesus says there's neither rich nor poor, Jew nor Gentile, man or woman, you're all one in Jesus Christ. I think that's probably the most effective basis for egalitarianism.
Yeah, well, and that brings up a good point, which is that, even if he's saying like egalitarianism is something, say, that's even more than subjective, it's still only epistemology. It's still only at that kind of baseline level. And what you're doing by saying, well, the Gospels provide a source for that, is you're going higher into the ontology and say, hey, there's an actual ontological basis for egalitarianism.
Yes.
Which I think is really helpful.
Can you define egalitarianism? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, it's just a doctrine, I guess. Well, again, this is not anything I think anyone here is an expert in, but I think generally that economic equality is to be preferred. And let's kind of leave it at that. which is not you can't equate that with communism or anything, because I think there are arguments, and guys like Jordan Peterson make arguments as to why it's good not to have huge disparities between the rich and the poor.
Ooh, I'm definitely going to be asking you about Jordan Peterson and the Web Extended, because, oh man, some interesting conversations that can be had there. But I do, before we go, I know there's the YouTube channel, Deflating Atheism. There's the Facebook page, Deflating Atheism. Is there anything else you'd like to point the audience to?
Well, yes, funny you should say that. First off, I am in the process. Oh, this bass. So I'm kidding. This guy's channel. He's a Steelers fan, so no. But go through the very tedious process of uploading my back catalog onto BitChute. So I'm about a quarter of the way done. But yeah, it's a very, very boring process. But there's also, obviously, look for Deflating Atheism on BitChute, and I also have a very non-essential Instagram, and I have a Patreon.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, definitely, everybody.
But yeah, I do. Please do. First off, YouTube is unsubscribing people from channels like crazy these days. I lost 7 subscribers in one day, and I only have 3 more subscribers than I did a month ago. So they are like deleting subscribers. So please subscribe to the YouTube channel, and please resubscribe if that's necessary, because they really are unsubscribing people. And the Facebook page is a good way to keep abreast of what's going on.
Yeah, and I'll back you up on that. That's happened to me a couple times, and my first initial kind of thought was, I guess people just stop being interested in the channel. But it has happened on multiple occasions, and probably because I have some political videos on my channel, not just the Christian apologetic stuff. But yeah, everyone definitely go subscribe to Deflating Atheism on Patreon to help support him. He's doing great work over there. I really enjoy his content. And we will see you guys on Web Extended. But to see that, you'll have to head on over to subscribestar.com/TUA. So you subscribe, you get all the bonus content with Braxton Hunter, Cameron Batista from Capturing Christianity, Josh Rasmussen, and this one with Deflating Atheism. Deflating Atheism, thanks so much for being here, sir. And see you on Web Extended.
Thank you so much.